Now we're getting underneath it. We've done our preparation. We are now ready to sit down. We're 10 days before our exam based on the hypothetical I gave you at the beginning. And how are we now going to revise? We've spent some time, we've scheduled in going through the syllabus. We know what our areas for development are, and we're sat down. And now, how are we going to revise? Now, I fully appreciate that most people that are sitting exams for the first time as a adult professional may not have prepared for exams for a number of years, and maybe even back then wouldn't have known how to properly prepare for exams. So what I'm going to give you now is a chunk of different methods. Now, these methods won't work. It's about picking what is right for you and your style. It's not about doing everything and every one of those. You might find one method that you repeatedly use over and over again, and that's right for you. You might be a person that wants to try multiple different methods and have a go and have variety in terms of what you do. So when you're sitting down one day to the next day, you're doing different ideas. The key is interacting with the content. Reading your notes or your study guide is not enough. You need to interact with the content. All educational research shows is that by interacting and applying knowledge is the way to embed understanding within your brain capacity. Just reading is not enough. Most of that is disregarded. 90% of what you read is disregarded after you've read it. So actually interacting with that content is key, and applying it. And we're going to look at different tools to be able to support you with that now. Now, there are some keys to this, is that actually one of the big falls downs in revision is that people want it to be nice and easy. They don't want it to be challenging. They've learned all the stuff, that you've done all the sort of prep work, and now what you want to do is you want to be confident. But actually the increase, making sure it's desirably difficult for you, it's how you embed knowledge, because that's how the brain works psychologically. So many of the strategies I'm going to cover are about making sure that you challenge yourself to be able to understand the content, and that's what leads to long-term retention and long-term memory. If it's not challenging enough, then that your brain sees that in simplest terms as not being worth remembering. So it has to be challenging enough. So it might seem like it says here, counterintuitive to use strategies that are outside your comfort zone, because it might seem that they're hard work to utilize those strategies, but those strategies potentially will give you a sort of a boost towards the end once you've utilized them. Another aspect that's really worth remembering, and this is why I say that reading is not enough, is that dual coding has also been proven and educationally to be one of the most effective methods in terms of developing memory and long-term embedded understanding of content. So using the information in more than one context. So just reading something doesn't enable you to embed that knowledge. Reading something and then using that information to do something else with then is what dual coding is enables you to develop and breed that level of understanding. There has been a lot of research in the past around preferred learning style, and ultimately the research has showed that yes, people do have a preferred learning style, but actually utilizing more than one level of learning style is a much better way of retaining information and ultimately challenging your brain to work in a different way, which embeds that knowledge. So it's not about doing things in lots of different ways, though. Dual coding is called dual for a reason. So looking at two different methods of retaining a single piece of knowledge. Don't do too much because your brain can get overwhelmed and it can make it too complex for you. So moving on to some sort of a more sort of physical techniques. So in terms of understanding, so the Loki technique is looking at is how people that do memory challenges, so world records for memorizing 10 packs of cards once they've been shuffled, etc., uses the Loki technique in most cases. And most of your sort of memory people that are famous for remembering things will use this technique, and it could be utilized for yourselves as well. It's about giving a sort of a knowledge, a story, or a narrative around things that you know. So the best example is in terms of remembering sort of items or packs of cards is people will sort of walk around their own house and they will see the cards or the items that they're trying to remember in different places in their house, and that's how they recollect. So they will put them into a visual space. Now, to do this with knowledge, for example, in terms of how you would do this with knowledge and understanding with content, is about locating things that remind you of the content that you're covering, and giving them images or faces or personalities to be able to remember them, and giving that a story or a scenario, particularly with your case studies. This is where relating to your own context is quite important, or a hypothetical context that you want to come across in the future. So what would that look like, and therefore how would you apply it, and visualizing yourself in terms of sat down and sort of watching them at the desk whilst you're doing the exam, that visualization. So write the narrative in steps as you do it. And so that's the bringing in the dual coding. It's not just about having this visual, it's about them writing it down as bullet points or a storyboard. You don't need to be a great artist, stick mem will do, in terms of what that might look like. But in terms of remembering how you would apply it to a certain model, this technique might be quite useful. And then we have chunking. Chunking can be utilized in many different aspects in terms of what that might look like. And if you have a list of things to learn, then start to build them up slowly. So look at what that looks like. Learn the first three first of all. Okay, don't look at the page of the syllabus. Look at the first three, do the background reading behind those, cover the rest, physically cover the rest. And I do implore you to sort of, think about how you're doing this physically as well. So putting a piece of paper or a book over the ones that you're not looking at yet, reading the first, page of the book, the first three items, doing the reading around those first bits of indicative content, then add the next three in. But then thinking about how those three relate to the first three, what crossover is there? Then add the next three, and building up your knowledge. Knowledge is built through foundations. This is how schools work. They start by teaching the sort of simplistic, then they build more complexity around it, and then further complexity until you get to the end of school and you know stuff. And utilizing that sort of level of understanding about learning is understanding the foundation. What does that look like? And then building upon that with the next level of content and the next level of content. And remember, you're doing this for the areas that you've decided you need to develop, not for those that you're already confident with. So it's going back to the beginning. What actually is the core foundation of this that I need to know? What are the first three bits of information that I need? And then what are the next bits? How do they relate to that? And actually writing that down in either in note form or writing links or mind maps, etc. And I'll come on to some of those in a minute of what that might look like. Mixing them up and keeping it flexible. What does that, look like once you've gone over and making sure that you have that full knowledge around that learning objective that you're not confident with, that piece of assessment criteria, whatever you've identified, how are you going to chunk that down? And sometimes the thinking around these sorts of things in terms of how you're going to chunk it is the first stage to be able to get underneath the understanding and build that foundation for development. This is very similar to the Loki strategy, but this is about personal association. So thinking about the relationship that you have with the subject that you're already familiar with. It could be quite comical or nonsensical. It could be where you've had something humorous happen in the past where actually you wish you'd had this piece of knowledge. what it might be like, what does it sound like, what does it look like. Senses are really important in remembering things. So one of the things that people have talked about in terms of memory is associating things with sounds like music or different things, songs. So some people, in terms of revision, will play the same song over and over again while they're revising a particular method or model or learning objective. And then when they're in the exam and they know that a question has come up, they will remember the song, which will then help them to remember the content that goes with it. So hopefully that sort of thing. It might be a smell. It might be that you wear the same perfume as you're revising when you're revising as when you are sitting your exam for that particular module. Those sorts of things have been proven to be very effective in supporting you in remembering. So personal association is sort of that next level. And then we're going into some slightly more in-depth methods of being able to develop your revision and some more practical ideas. So going through, making sure that you understand something, looking through your notes, and then explain it to yourself out loud. What does that look like? Sometimes these things might feel uncomfortable. I said about that desirable difficulty. It might not be comfortable for you to sit in a room and just talk out loud about something, but that ability to explain a concept to somebody else, whether that's to yourself, a colleague, or a friend, or family, for them to be able to talk through the process and then maybe ask some questions about it. What do we need to do in terms of that, for you to be able to explain it in more detail, and then build up that level of understanding. So trying to do this first without notes, and then you can start to check yourself for accuracy. Was there any, go back to your notes, was there anything you missed that was key? Each time you rehearse it out loud, you're adding new detail, you're going back, you're saying what was new, what could I have included there, and seeing that, particularly if you have a colleague at work that's already completed their CIPS qualifications. Have you given them enough detail? Do they still understand it? Have you provided it? Or a colleague that's working with the model that you're trying to explain. It might feel uncomfortable to ask someone to do that, but ultimately your exams are important. So finding someone that you trust to be able to do that, verbally explaining something, is quite a high level. Shows a high level of understanding. And then we go to thinking about also how you can support yourself in testing your own knowledge. So constructing your own questions. Put yourself in the picture. You've got the syllabus, you've got the notes, you've got the indicative content, you've got everything that a tutor or an assessor would have to be able to write the questions. Once you've done one of the other techniques, can you now start to think about what the questions might look like? What is that command word? Make them challenging. And what I would do with this is I would write some questions one day and then try and answer the questions 2 or 3 days later. So I'm not writing the questions then answering them. I'm writing the questions, then I'm coming back to them without looking at my notes, and seeing if I can ask them. This strategy, and I'm not saying it's the effective. Our assessors are trained, and questions go through a long process of being developed. But it helps you anticipate, particularly using the syllabus as to what they potentially could ask. But it also helps you to break down what kind of knowledge you need to revise. What do you need to know to be able to answer questions on this? And remember those command words in that assessment criteria. They're there to support you. Okay. Flashcards, one method that is widely used, particularly in the sort of universities, very highly promoted by universities and the higher education areas, is using flashcards. The simplest, particularly on knowledge recall, on understanding when you see a context, what does that look like? One of the simplest ways is that you write a question or a prompt on one side and the answers on the other. You look at the prompt and you try to see if you can remember what the reverse says. Actually preparing the flashcards is part of the process of revision, because you're preparing the flashcards either for your amber or your red modules. So that's when you're doing your first, you're looking up what the content is, what you need to know. But and then answering, going back to them. It's a bit like the questions I just talked about. Is you prepare the flashcards one day, you go back to them and you try and recall what you put on the back of them the next day. And then there are alternatives. You can have visual clues. You can have a picture of a model missing some bits or gaps in it, and what are the missing gaps. You can have the command word. What does it mean? What am I going to have to do? You could have the command word. You could mix it with what the assessment criteria was, what learning objective it is, and therefore try to remember the indicative content that goes with it. You could put the assessment criteria on or the learning objective and try to recall what each of the pieces of indicative content are, or explain each of them. And the other option is to go digital with flashcards. There are programs out there. You can Google, or other search engines are available as well. There are sort of Quizlet and Anki are two of the methods where you can go in and produce digital flashcards that you can then download onto an app on your phone. So you don't have to carry around paper cards with you, and find those. So, you know, if you're searching for that, just search for digital flashcards and you'll be able to prepare some digital ones as well. And then you can have 10 minutes here, there and everywhere. And then you've got mind maps. Mind maps, again, are probably one of those that are thrown out as a tried and tested method that works for many. Works for many, but not for everybody. So it is in terms of depending also on the content of what that looks like, in terms of what that needs to be. And the mind map to properly work needs an element of creativity, flair and colour. If that doesn't sit with you, and you're not very competent at producing mind maps, then avoid them. It's not, if it doesn't work for you, you don't need to do it. A mind map, in terms of the suggested method of how to do a mind map, and there is lots of advice online for mind mapping, is that you put the core idea at the center of the page. That could be either the learning objective or the assessment criteria. Depends how big you're looking and where your RAG rating has put you. You then branch out to the topics and the indicative content, using either the syllabus, your study guide, or starting with your own knowledge. What do you know already? And then you start to grow each topic with knowledge and facts and content. So you're gradually growing out. And then you start to connect linking ideas. So linking your indicative content with different parts of knowledge that is needed in more than one area, etc. And then start to create linking ideas. Once you've got this, what would be quite a probably messy mind map, is you can then reflect on that and refine it into something, using your creativity and your flair, into something that is more of a summary of that topic. So reducing it down from complex mind map into much more visually appealing mind map. Again, there's opportunities. There are online mind mapping tools as well to go digital, and lots of these are now sort of built into things like PowerPoint, etc. You can build your own mind maps within those, and they have strategies for you to be able to do that. And there are a number of AI mind mapping tools where you can put things in, and they will start to develop them for you. But remember that the revision process potentially is very much about building it yourself and not having one just to look at, because the process of understanding how things link together is really relevant for yourself as well. I just wanted to cover highlighting, because highlighting is sometimes a little hole that some people go down of thinking, I'm just going to go through and highlight everything that's important, or everything that I don't know, or all the keywords. And I wanted to make sure that we're highlighting. Research has really shown that highlighting alone does not impact on an individual's ability to recall. It doesn't actually. Highlighting the words that we need to know, a chunk of content that you don't know, doesn't actually embed that knowledge any further into you. It is very much about the process of once you've done the highlighting, what do you then do with it? So it doesn't mean that highlighting isn't something you should do. But highlighting is the start point of what you need to do. So if you are highlighting, once you've done that, what are you going to do with that information? Are you going to extract that information, put it into bullet point summaries? Are you going to annotate where you've highlighted or put links to it? Or are you going to highlight that information, then apply to a different context? So what are you doing with that information? Okay. And then finally, I'm going to go through a 3-step process about summarizing your content. So this is known as reduce, repeat, and remember. And this can be done in a number of different ways. And this is just a suggested way. But the method here about reducing the information you have, repeating that information, leads to a solid way to remember that information. So I've put a suggested process here, but ultimately reduce, repeat, remember is a solid method for revision. So in terms of how you could reduce, you could start by reading through a section of your notes, reading it through a couple of times, a small section, so no more really than 2 assessment criteria, and write down numbers 1 to 5. And then from that, closing the book, closing the information, covering over your notes. What are the 5 key ideas from that section, and write them down. And then start to write down and then break that down into numbers 6 to 10. What 5 keywords can you get from those key ideas that you've got? And then finally, what 5 questions could you ask about that section? So not necessarily exam questions here, but what 5 questions could you ask someone or yourself to help recall that section? You've now reduced that, what would be a page or a section, into an overview of the key points. You've got 5 key points, you've got 5 keywords you need to remember, and you've got 5 questions that you could ask yourself at a later date. It could either be done on pages, but it is a way that you can also produce flashcards for later. You've got your key ideas, you've got your keywords, and then you've got your questions that you could ask yourself. So reducing the information down to provide you with a easy to recall revision method. So utilizing your red or amber areas and reducing them down. Then repeating. So identifying that single learning objective, using your study guide or your information and notes to make a list of bullet points that are relevant, no more than 20. What we're then going to do is you're going to read the bullet points and you're going to reduce it down to 15 by either consolidating bullet points together or removing it if you actually go, actually, I know that I'm confident with that, or actually that's not as relevant as the other ones. You're then going to repeat that and you're going to reduce it down to 10. And then those 10 bullet points are the ones that you're going to add to flashcards. So you're then going to repeat that. But you're repeating the information over and over again. And then you've got your flashcards to review at a later date. It doesn't have to be flashcards. It could just be that you have those notes if that doesn't really work. And then finally, once you've summarized that, you're going to place, once you've done these methods, once you've tried any of your methods here that I've suggested to you today, and remember what I said, it's not about testing them all. It's about trying the ones that you find the most useful for yourself. Is that you're going to place the learning objectives at the top of the page. You're then going to read the relevant pages of the study guide, the syllabus, your notes or information, close it all, and then you're going to try and remember as much as that as you can. You're going to see what you remember. Then you're going to revisit your study guide and see what you've missed out, what you haven't got, what you need to do, and then you're going to add that in a different colour. That's key, adding it in a different colour. And once you've done that, you've identified the bits you don't remember because you've remembered the other bits. And they're the bits that you need to revisit either by adding to flashcards or utilising one of the other areas. So I think this is about building in a level of personal sort of accountability for yourself and building in strategies that would be able to develop your own understanding and for you to test your understanding. And I hope through that sort of chunk of information, there is a strategy or two that you feel that you'd be able to go away and use. And